For this unit, we're talking about ecosystems, and there will be a project where you're going to consider a specific ecosystem at the end. So first of all, we're going to talk about the organization. An ecosystem is a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. So in other words, an area where a whole bunch of organisms live and interact with each other. So it could be a forest, it could be a savanna, it could be a desert, it could be up on the mountaintops in the tundra. Okay, we've got abiotic and biotic factors within an ecosystem. So biotic would be living factors. So remember that the term bio means life. So biotic means living. Abiotic, the prefix a means not. So abiotic means not living factors, and they're within the ecosystem. So an example of biotic could be the plants growing, could be the mouse, could be the ant. And for abiotic, we could be talking about the sun being out, the clouds, the rain, stuff that's not living, the lakes and rivers and oceans, those would all be abiotic factors. Producers are important in an ecosystem because without producers, we wouldn't have any other species. Sunlight is the main energy source for life on Earth. Producers, also known as autotrophs. Autotrophs are species that use light or chemical energy to make food. They're able to make their own food. Auto means self, troph means feeding. So autotrophs are able to feed themselves without relying on any other organisms. So examples of producers include plants, plant-like protists like algae, and bacteria. Okay, producers use photosynthesis, which is using light energy to convert carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and carbohydrates. So here's our equation for photosynthesis. Hopefully you've seen this before. Carbon dioxide plus water using light energy gives us oxygen and sugar. That is what plants do to give us the oxygen that we need to breathe. Chemiosynthesis is performed by bacteria, and that uses chemical energy to produce carbohydrates or those sugars that are needed. So different processes, but in the end are both yielding sugar for life. Consumers, also known as heterotrophs, hetero meaning different, feeding, so they have to rely on others for their food supply. Examples of consumers could be anything that's eating the plants, anything that's eating the producers. They can also eat other organisms. So we've got herbivores, which are going to obtain energy by eating only plants. Carnivores eat only animals. And omnivores eat both plants and animals. So a bear, for instance, could eat berries, but they could also eat fish. Decomposers, like this fungi over here, this mushroom, will break down dead organic matter, and that is why you will see mushrooms growing by dead trees, because they feed off of the dead matter. Feeding interactions. So energy flows through an ecosystem in one direction, from the sun to autotrophs and then to heterotrophs. So the sun's always the source of our energy, and our first trophic level is going to be our producers. And then we have our herbivores that eat the producers. And then the next level is going to be the carnivores that eat mostly the primary consumers, so the organisms here. And they might eat plants too. And then our higher level is going to eat the lower. So basically each level eats every other level. This should be review from stuff that you have learned in the past. Food chain is a series of steps in which organisms transfer energy by eating and being eaten. The arrows always go in the direction of how energy is transferred. So it's going to go from the producer to the consumer. So your energy is always starting with the producer. It's using the sun's energy, and then it's transferring it into chemical energy, and then the consumers are eating those producers, and the energy keeps going up the food chain. So we've got grass, which is eaten by the cricket, which is eaten by the frog, which is eaten by the raccoon. So you'll notice that the arrows are always pointing towards whatever is eating the organism. So the energy is always moving to that higher organism. Food web is a network of food chains within an ecosystem. So this is going to show the relationship of all of the species within an ecosystem. Now you're going to be setting up the same type of thing for your project. So based on this, which of the organisms above is the producer? Well, producers are always going to have the back ends of the arrows. That's one way to tell. So we've got the grass. And which of the organisms above is the top consumer? The top consumer is always going to have the arrows pointing to it. And there should never be any arrows going from the top consumer to something else. If it does, then it's not the top consumer. So the hawk in this case is the top consumer. Trophic levels. Each step in a food chain or food web has trophic levels. So we've got our level 1, which is our producers. We've already mentioned this. Our level 2 is our primary consumers. Our third level is our secondary consumers. And our fourth level is the tertiary consumers. The top ones are always going to be carnivores. Very rarely are they herbivores. But there might be a slight chance in some ecosystem somewhere where the top might be an herbivore, depending upon what's in the ecosystem. I'm not going to say it's not, and it's not a possibility. Your primary consumers are always going to be your herbivores. Secondary can be carnivores or omnivores. All right, so for food webs, here's a couple of examples. So they can be drawn such that the images are not in it. But no matter what kind of food web you're talking about, your arrows always point from the lower end to the higher part of the food web.